Welcome to the Italian Renaissance podcast, where we discuss the culture and art of 15th and 16th century Italy. I'm your host, Lawrence Gianangeli. Andiamo avanti. Renaissance people, welcome back to the show and our continuation of the discussion of the House of Este. In our last episode, we traced the rise of the Este family from their medieval roots to the powerful court that they built in Ferrara. We focused mainly on Niccolo III d'Este, that's the pragmatic patrician whose long rule set the stage for a flourishing Renaissance court. His illegitimate but carefully educated son, Leonello d'Este, carried that vision forward, a true humanist ruler who embraced classical ideals, artistic patronage, and, let's say, civic refinement. We explored Leonello's commissions, including the first monumental equestrian statue of the Renaissance honoring his father Niccolo. Then we turned to his half-brother and successor, Borso d'Este. Unlike Leonello, Borso wasn't a scholar, but he understood the power of spectacle. His enthroned bronze statue, commissioned in 1453, asserted his sovereignty. We also touched on the evolving Ferrarese painting style under Borso's patronage, but very, very, very briefly, which is where we're picking up now. So if you did not listen to the last episode, I would start there before continuing here. Picking up with Borso. In this very wonderful book by the art historian Alison Cole called Italian Renaissance Courts, Art, Pleasure, and Power, she precisely identifies the essence of painting in Ferrara under Borso d'Este's reign. She says, and I'm reading here on page 147 from her book, quote, "From Borso's time onward, the talents of Ferrarese painters were employed extensively by the court, the clergy, and the civic community. Their decorative and expressive mannerisms, while clearly in line with stylistic developments in northern Italy in general, were allowed to flourish vigorously under Este patronage. In this respect, the example set by Florence, so important to many other Italian courts, had comparatively little impact. The Ferrarese seem to be more interested in the affinity of painting to poetry, literature, music, and theater than its relation to its three-dimensional sister arts, sculpture, and architecture. Modern scholars of Este Ferrara have rightly stressed the pervasive influence of manuscript miniatures and decorations on the painters of the court. So we're talking a relationship between the northern courts in Italy, the painting styles developing there, not in Florence, but also the Ferrara tradition of manuscript painting and how that translates into large-scale painting. With that in mind, we should look at what is by far the most important surviving commission from Borso's reign, and that is the frescoes in the Palazzo Schifanoia. So, like most aristocratic families, the Este owned several palaces in both the city center and the countryside. Schifanoia, although walking distance from central Ferrara still today, would have been on the outskirts of the Renaissance city, a true pleasure palace on the fringe of the hunting grounds used by the Este for sport. The name of the palace directly tells you that purpose. Schifare, which is an old term meaning to escape, and noia, boredom. So this is the palace where one goes to escape boredom, Schifanoia. As a little funny aside, being not a mother tongue Italian speaker, I was trying to figure out what this meant before I read it. And schifo means disgusting, and noia means boredom still. So I thought it had something to do with schifo, right? That's a great word to learn, by the way. Schifo, it means disgusting. So that's not what this means. It comes from schifare, which means to escape, not disgust. Anyway, we have the Palazzo Schifanoia on the fringe of Ferrara, and as a result, we arrive at a very secular type of painting throughout the palace, with mythological figures, scenes from life at court, but most strikingly, the Hall of Months. You get a very large fresco cycle organized along a calendar-like scheme with a particular focus on astrology and the zodiac, something that was taken as science in the Renaissance. So now, I've already produced a YouTube video on the Hall of Months, particularly a fresco in there called The Triumph of Venus. I'm going to link that video in the show notes so that you guys can go and I take video of the entire room so that you can see what the Hall of Months looks like with a close-up on the Triumph of Venus, who I'm not going to talk about here today. But these frescoes in the Hall of Months were predominantly executed from the late 1460s and into the early 1470s by a painter named Francesco del Cosa, Ferrara-born painter who, along with another very remarkable Ferrarese painter, Cosme Tura, were among the most important artists of the Ferrara school in the 1400s. The third of these, let's call them three Ferrara crowns, was Ercole de Roberti, who likely worked on the Hall of Months as an apprentice to both Francesco del Cossa and Cosme Tura. He later becomes sort of the bee's knees of the Ferrara school, and he would carry their legacy in the following decades. In this court context of the hall as a whole, we see the repeated image of Borso d'Este, who presents himself as an emblem of good governance. As an aside, I always really liked Borso's portraits because he actually seems like such a fun, jolly man. Slightly goofy, I suppose, in a very lovable way. There has to be some intention behind that perception because I have never seen any Renaissance ruler self-fashion that way. But once you recognize it, Borso seems to become a very familiar figure in a somewhat warm but odd way, because that, of course, is not always the story. He's just got this funny little smile and these little jowls and this chubby neck. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but you'll see when you look at these images. Anyway, a fresco cycle as complex as the Hall of Months would have certainly needed a series of advisors and rhetors, including someone well-versed in astrology. So on the lower register, you get the earthly register. We get scenes from Borso's court. The middle register is the cosmic representation of the zodiac sign, and one associated with the specific month in question. That month is then an allegory on the upper register, the top register. That Triumph of Venus I'm talking about is an allegorical painting from the top register in the YouTube video. The room itself appears to be taken right out of that vibrant tradition in Ferrara of lavish manuscript illumination. Guys, remember, manuscript illumination doesn't mean you shine a light on it. It means you paint it. That is what that term is called, when you paint inside of a manuscript and use gold leaf and decorations and make those big historiated initials and that sort of thing is called illumination. So the lavish manuscript illumination of Ferrara inspires this. Each section of the wall looking like a blown up illustration inside of a manuscript, like you're flipping through pages as you're walking the grand hall, taking a journey through the months, through the whole year, embracing the cosmos, the zodiac, and of course, always being reminded of Borso's presence and good grace. He who has hosted you, and you are allowed to see this work because of him. We are now late in the Quattrocento, so the Ferrara school has shaken off a fair amount of that international Gothic style that we saw earlier with Pisanello, right? But not entirely. Yet figures are grounded with very sharp sense of linear perspective, showing a bit of influence of the Florentine tradition. And this is just one room in the whole Palazzo Schifanoia, but like everything in Ferrara, so much has been damaged, lost, or relocated. So this is the prized room when you go to Palazzo Schifanoia, which you must do if you visit Ferrara. When Borso died in 1471, his brother Ercole took over. This is another son of Niccolo III, and he becomes ruler of Ferrara. So we're on the third son of Niccolo. This is the exact same Ercole who I talked about in the last episode, who accompanied the Este troops in this plot to kill Piero de' Medici. I just want to note the way Niccolo named his children because this is interesting. Leonello, the little lion. Borso, who's named after Sir Bors, who was one of the knights of the Round Table from the French Arthurian legends, I should say, and we're going to actually come back to that at the end of the episode. So remember that French epics are important in the Este court. And now we arrive at Ercole. That is Hercules or Heracles from the Greek and Roman mythology.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Renaissance people, if you are enjoying the Italian Renaissance podcast, I have good news. We're now active on Patreon. You can show your love for the show by becoming a patron and get access to additional resources, information, and artworks. Better yet, those who join the Renaissance Master or Renaissance Patron tier will get access to at least one additional podcast episode each month. My goal is to ensure that the main podcast remains a free, accessible source for everyone. Become a patron today through the link in the show notes to support the continued production of new episodes and help build and maintain this community. The Italian Renaissance shop is now also active on Etsy, linked in the show notes. Sport our logo or choose from a growing selection of Italian art-inspired designs. Discounts are offered to select Patreon tiers as well. Your support has my immortal gratitude. Now, enjoy the show.
Ercole, who we're turning on to now, spent his childhood in the court of Naples under Alfonso I and actually married Alfonso's daughter, Eleonora of Aragon, in 1473. Remember, Leonello had also made a marriage alliance with Naples, so there is a continued allegiance between Ferrara and Naples through the union of Ercole and Eleonora. They have several children together, including who is going to be the next duke, Alfonso I, and the famous Isabella d'Este is one of their children. We should know a little bit about her, and we're going to discuss her when we get to the court of Gonzaga and Mantua in the future. The other interesting elements is that Ercole was actually Niccolo's legitimate son, unlike Leonello and Borso, who were illegitimate. So he had actually less opposition to his claim and thus could engage the political landscape a bit differently. Ercole cultivated a more expansive and strategically visionary court. He is perhaps best remembered for transforming the city of Ferrara into one of the most vibrant cultural centers in Italy, commissioning everything from gigantic theater productions and courtly music to expansive architectural projects. Probably most importantly, he initiated the famed Addizione Erculea, the Herculean addition, which expanded the city with a bold new urban plan. And this was spearheaded by a very celebrated architect, Biagio Rossetti, the most achieved architect of Renaissance Ferrara. Ercole's patronage was deliberate and far reaching, and it was designed to project Ferrara as a city of grandeur, intellect, and we can even say divine order on the Renaissance stage. This is no longer a city of lords, it is a ducal city, and Duke Ercole, legitimate son of Niccolo III, is going to assert that in his building patronage. This project, we call it the Addizione, focused on restructuring Ferrara both urbanly and defensively, especially in light of what was a recent military defeat in a war against Venice. So we need to shore up our defenses. We lost, right? In the newly developed urban area, Biagio Rossetti designed his most astonishing architectural work that is called the Palazzo dei Diamanti, the Palace of Diamonds. And that's not because there are glittering gems on the front. This is a Renaissance palace with a facade cut entirely of diamond patterns in stone. The diamond shape being a device of Ercole and a direct reference to his patronage. So his device is literally the facade of the palace. Today, the Palazzo dei Diamanti is actually an excellent museum featuring a great number of works from the Ferrara school of painting. So when you go to Ferrara and you've seen the Este castle and you've seen the Palazzo Schifanoia, you will also need to see the Palazzo dei Diamanti, where the painting collection is held. And this was commissioned by Ercole. So Ercole reigned until his death in 1505. His son Alfonso took over as duke and had a nearly 30-year reign. If you recall the history of Titian, now let's dial back to our conversation about Titian in Venice, because we're into the Cinquecento now. We're into the 16th century. Think about Titian and his amazing works for the Este court that we talked about. It was Duke Alfonso who commissioned them, including the stunning Bacchus and Ariadne that is in the National Gallery in London. It is here that we see an interesting development and shift in the painting of the Ferrara court. Alfonso's primary court painter also worked on this mythological series that Titian worked on. That painter's name is Dosso Dossi, and he truly is one of the most delightful and, in my opinion, overlooked artists of the Renaissance period. So now we're talking Dosso Dossi in the court of Duke Alfonso d'Este in the early 16th century. Dossi truly embraces what we would say is the Venetian school, particularly that enigmatic and poetic style of Giorgione. Remember Giorgione? If we look at his works, we don't know what the heck is going on in them because they're supposed to evoke feeling, familiarity, emotion, not necessarily direct, legible narrative. Dossi's going to do some of that too. And we also get those vibrant colors and the painterly quality of Titian. We want to see the paint strokes. We want to see the bold oil paints, the colors, brightness. And we can see this in his works for Alfonso that went alongside that of Titian, The Triumph of Bacchus from 1514, a work that really helps us understand the way Ferrara adapted to artistic trends, as this painting, Dosso Dossi's Triumph of Bacchus, has all of the modeling made famous by the Florentine school. That is like the rendering of bodies and figures and shapes and forms, and it's grounded in solely mythological tastes, but has the close-up immediacy and vibrancy of Venetian painting. That's what I love about Dosso Dossi, because geographically Ferrara is right in between Florence and Venice. His work seems to really captivate the greatest qualities of both schools of painting, and that is why he's one of the best. When I was in Ferrara visiting these places and looking at these artists, I was able to make a fun little video showing the really up close details of Dosso Dossi's Apollo and Daphne. I'm also going to link that video in the show notes for your reference because this artwork is magnificent. As a court painter, Dossi also completed the most important portraits of his patrons, which are excellent achievements of likeness and prestige, particularly his 1530 portrait of Alfonso d'Este, which I'm only mentioning, right? We're not going to look at those details because this is a marathon. We're really running through the Este court, and there is only one last honorable mention that I would like to make so that we can wrap up and finish off this treatment of Este patronage. So turning away from the Palazzo Schifanoia and Borso and Dosso Dossi and Titian and Alfonso, among the most prominent Renaissance authors was actually from Reggio Emilia, which was in the dominion of the Este. I'm talking about Ludovico Ariosto. He came to the Este court as part of the cultural revolution happening under Este patronage. Ariosto is on the border between essential reading for studying the Renaissance and being excruciatingly difficult, at least for me, especially in his original language. I think he's difficult in translation as well. His masterpiece is called Orlando Furioso. I think we translate that to Orlando Enraged. And this was not commissioned by Alfonso, but by the Cardinal Ippolito d'Este. That is Duke Alfonso's son that he had with Lucrezia Borgia, who became cardinal. He commissions this work by Ariosto. We first see it published in 1516, and it is one of the great epic poems of the Renaissance. It continues the story of Orlando Innamorato, Orlando in Love, by the author Matteo Maria Boiardo, which was another continuation picking up from the tale of Charlemagne's knights, particularly the love-maddened Orlando. I told you guys, remember, we're going to be talking about French epic. That's what we're talking about. Let's see. We don't actually call him Orlando very often in English. We call him Roland, which comes from the Chanson de Roland. Forgive my French. Roland is the Orlando, right? That's what we're talking about. Charlemagne's Knights, which is blending romance, chivalry, and fantasy. So Ariosto's work reflects both the courtly ideals and the humanistic wit that had, at this point, been flourishing under Este patronage for over half a century. The final version of Orlando Furioso was published in 1532 and has ever since been a staple in the whole breadth of early modern European literature. This work is filled with wild adventures, and we're including the adventurous retelling of the Andromeda myth, if you guys know about that, where a damsel is chained to a rock and threatened to be consumed by a horrible sea monster, in this case named the Orca, the Orc. Now, in Orlando Furioso, instead of Andromeda, we have Angelica, who is rescued when Orlando actually enters the mouth of the creature and stabs it with a sword from inside of its mouth. Quite the epic adventure. Beyond that, I want to point out one more remarkable moment. This is Canto 20, chapter 20, where Ariosto introduces his mythological city of women by first praising the feats of women in general. I'm going to read these two brief verses by Ariosto in English. This is Canto number 20 of Orlando Furioso. Quote, women have always shown their excellence in all the arts they've sought to command, and every person that, with care and sense, has read the histories will understand that if, now, through some evil influence, such are absent or dismissed out of hand, it will pass with those who hid their glory, whether through blind ignorance or envy. For such is the virtue, it seems to me, that is possessed by women in this age. With pen and ink they'll win celebrity in years to come, who grace the written page. You and your works consign to infamy, you evil tongues that now command the stage. Their praise will be sung in such a manner as to surpass that earned by Marfisa. This is really interesting. He's condemning, he's uplifting women who write and who produce art as being hidden by the men of this age who are working to hide their glory. And those evil tongues who are doing that, those who now command the stage, he says, are condemned to infamy, as women will undoubtedly, one way or another, rise above the structured misogyny of Ariosto's day and be known for their amazing feats. This is not to say that there are not threads of misogyny in Ariosto, but only for this moment at the beginning of Canto 20. Guys, this is really remarkable. But it is a chivalric epic after all, catering to the very specific needs of the Este court. Indeed, we should look at this work, Orlando Furioso, in the same way we might consider a modern day bestseller. This type of patronage was paired with the printing of illustrated copies and painting. We're looping this back, guys. I didn't just plug in Ariosto for no reason. Using the booming printing technology that is now spread throughout Europe by the early 16th century. There are even illustrations by our beloved Dosso Dossi, and maybe with his brother, that was made for accompanying the printed text. In addition to those, which would have been woodblock prints, Dosso Dossi painted a marvelous work in the Galleria Borghese today that's actually titled Circe. That is the island witch from Homer's Odyssey. But Dosso Dossi's Circe has actually been argued to represent Melissa from Orlando Furioso. So the idea that Dosso was actually painting scenes from Orlando Furioso, and he was not the only one. What this shows us is that between Este patronage, the creation of an artist like Dosso Dossi, who creates a style out of not only that which Borso d'Este had give rise to in the 1400s, but becomes this sort of in between the Venetian school and the Florentine school. That is an interaction with the literature being produced, which is indicative of the wider court culture that is fascinated by chivalric epic. It shows us an interrelation between literary and visual patronage as a unified structure under Este rule, and what makes Ferrara, excuse me, so damn cool. We've run through quite a bit of history, and this is where I conclude our conversation of the Este rulers, seeing the transition from the early attitudes of Borso to a more refined type of patronage under Alfonso and the later Este family. I tried to give you an overview approach, and I hope this kind of podcast was something that you found useful to understand breadth and exciting production of the Este court in Ferrara. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, arrivederci.